Hi there, I'm Cullen from CullensABCs.com, and this story, Little Red Riding Hood, is sponsored by Storytime Felts, and it is from their Cottage Classic Felt Set. So, before we get started, let's put on our good-looking eyes together, shall we? Here we go. And our good listening ears? Okay, good job. So, Little Red Riding Hood lived with her mother in a house, and her mother wanted Little Red Riding Hood to go out and go to her grandmother's house because her grandmother was not feeling good. So she said, bring her a basket of food and go to her house. And she said, Little Red Riding Hood, do not talk to strangers. Just keep on walking and stay on the path. She said, okay, Mom. Bye. I'm going to go to Granny's house and I'll give her some food to eat and see how she's doing. Well, along the way, she saw some beautiful flowers on the path outside, and so she got off of the path to pick the beautiful flowers. And as she went off the path, there was somebody lurking in the woods, and that was the wolf. And the wolf said, "Oh, hello! How are you today, and where are you going, Little Red Riding Hood?" She said, "Oh, well, Mr. Wolf, I am going to see my grandmother, and she lives in this beautiful cottage, and I'm going to bring her some food." And the wolf said, "Oh, you are Little Red Riding Hood, okay." So off the wolf went, and he went ahead of Little Red Riding Hood. And he had a clever idea. Not such a good idea, but he had a good idea in his own mind. And he knocked on Granny's door. And Granny said, "Oh, come on in, Little Red Riding Hood." And so the wolf came in, and the Granny said, "Oh my, you're not Little Red Riding Hood." And he took her out of her bed and stuffed her in her closet. And then the wolf got into bed and pretended to be Granny, Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother. And he thought, oh, I'm going to try and trick Little Red Riding Hood. So then here came Little Red Riding Hood, and she came to the door, and she knocked on the door, and the wolf, but now remember, Little Red Riding Hood thinks that her grandmother's in the bed, not the wolf. So he's going to try and trick her, right? So Little Red Riding Hood came to the door, she knocked on the door, and who she thought was Granny said, "Oh, come on in, Little Red Riding Hood." And so Little Red Riding Hood came in and went upstairs and looked at who she thought was her grandmother, but actually was the wolf. And she looked at him and said, "Oh, what big eyes you have, Granny." And the wolf said, "Oh, better to see you with, dear." And Little Red Riding Hood looked at her grandmother's nose and said, "Oh, Granny, what a big nose you have." And the wolf said, "Oh, better to smell you with, dear." And Little Red Riding Hood said, "Oh, my, Granny, look at those teeth. What big teeth you have." And the wolf said, "Better to eat you up with, my dear." And Little Red Riding Hood ran downstairs and ran out the door and ran all the way home and screamed, "Ah, it's not Granny, it's not Granny." And then there was a nice woodsman that came along and got the wolf and then went back to Granny's house with Little Red Riding Hood and took Granny out of the closet. And the woodsman and Granny and Little Red Riding Hood sat down together and ate together. And they were all happy again, and they all lived happily ever after. Thanks, Storytime Felts. Bye.